Darren Blake, a second-year college student majoring in engineering, had always been a tech tinkerer. His free time was spent scavenging thrift stores for old gadgets to repair or repurpose. That's when he spotted the shortwave radio. It was old, probably from the 70s, with a patina that gave it character. $5, the store clerk mumbled. Darren didn't think twice. That night, he set it up in his cramped dorm room. He twisted the dials, testing its functionality. Static hissed, and faint voices emerged, speaking in languages he couldn't identify. It wasn't until nearly midnight that he stumbled upon the frequency. A low, distorted whisper filled the room. At first, he thought it was interference. Then, the words became clear. "I buried her in the woods by the creek. No one will ever find her." Darren froze. His hand hovered over the dial. The voice was calm, almost soothing, but the confession was chilling. Over the next few nights, Darren became obsessed with the frequency. Each time he tuned in, the radio whispered new confessions. "I started the fire at the elementary school. I switched her pills with sugar tablets. I sabotaged the brakes on his car." Darren couldn't understand why he was drawn to it, but the cryptic nature of the whispers ignited his curiosity. Who was broadcasting these confessions? Were they real crimes? He began jotting them down in a notebook, cross-referencing them with local news reports. Oddly, he couldn't find any records of the events. It was as if these crimes had never happened, or had been erased from history. One night, while tuning into the frequency, Darren heard something that made his blood run cold. "I watched him in his dorm, writing down every word I said. He doesn't know I've been in his room." Darren shot up from his chair. The voice sounded familiar. Too familiar. He turned to the window, peering into the darkness outside. For the first time, the dorm felt stiflingly small. A knock on his door made him jump. He hesitated before opening it. No one was there. Only the faint sound of static from the radio filled the silence. The next morning, Darren found a note slipped under his door. It was written in shaky, unfamiliar handwriting. "You know too much. Stop listening." He scanned the hallway, but it was empty. Returning to his room, he locked the door and checked the radio. The frequency was silent, save for faint static. Darren's heart raced. For the first time, he considered throwing the radio away, but something stopped him. It felt personal now. Then he noticed the smudged footprints near his desk. Someone had been in his room. That night, the frequency returned. The voice spoke again, but this time it wasn't whispering. It was louder, clearer. "I know what you did, Darren." He froze. The voice was his own. It repeated the sentence, then began recounting memories Darren had buried deep. The time he cheated on a group project, the time he lied to his parents about a failed exam, and worst of all, the time he... "No," he whispered, backing away from the radio. "This isn't possible." Darren couldn't sleep. The whispers haunted him, growing louder in his mind. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a threat. At 3 a.m., he heard the door handle jiggle. Someone was trying to get in. Grabbing a heavy flashlight, Darren approached the door. He flung it open, but the hallway was empty, except for a single muddy footprint leading away. The whispers on the radio grew more specific, guiding Darren to an old, abandoned creek on the outskirts of town. Compelled by some force he couldn't explain, he followed the instructions. When he arrived, he found a freshly dug patch of earth. In it was a box containing photographs. Photos of himself, taken over months. Each was labeled with details about his routine, his secrets, and his fears. The last photo showed Darren sitting at his desk, staring at the shortwave radio. Darren ran home, but when he burst into his room, he found the radio broadcasting again. The voice on the other end was laughing now, his laugh. Then it began speaking. "I buried him in the woods by the creek. No one will ever find him." The realization hit Darren like a freight train. The photographs, the footprints, the stalking. It was him, or rather, the version of himself that existed on the other side of the frequency. The radio was a mirror to his darkest impulses, broadcasting crimes he hadn't yet committed. Or had he already? Darren looked at his hands. They were caked with dirt. The next morning, Darren's dorm room was empty. The police found no sign of foul play, only an old radio emitting faint static. His friends said he'd been acting strange, talking about shadows and voices. And somewhere, on an obscure shortwave frequency, a new voice began to whisper,